In suburbs, Nick and his wife Maggie live a happy life with their children, 𝐲𝐲 and Max. But their world is shaken when Maggie has a heart attack and ends up in the hospital. She's been waiting weeks for a heart transplant. Balancing work and caring for the kids at the same time becomes very difficult for Nick. One evening, he takes kids to a presentation by Cobalt Industries, where they learn about advanced robots, called 𝐀𝐬𝐲𝐝, which can help humans assist with daily tasks. Intrigued, Nick considers getting one and hears all the details from the seller, who promises that 𝐀𝐬𝐲𝐝 adapt to their owner's needs. While Nick is distracted, 𝐲𝐲 wanders around on her own. He starts to freak out when he notices. Fortunately, a sim named Alice brings her back safely. Alice proposes to watch over 𝐲𝐲 while Nick shops, and she even tells a jokes, surprising Nick. The seller explains Alice is the newest model, designed with AI sophisticated, which is enough to mimic human emotions, which makes it capable of taking care of children, and now 𝐲𝐲 wants her. The next morning, Nick struggles to manage call from work and feed the kids. Just as things get chaotic, Alice arrives and immediately takes charge, asking for the family's schedules and noting the messy house and a loose railing. After Nick leaves to drop the kids at school, Alice syncs with the smart fridge's shopping list with just a blink and starts tidying up the rooms. She notices a digital picture frame of the family, including Maggie. By the time the family returns, the house is spotless, and dinner is ready. However, 𝐲𝐲 complains that the lasagna doesn't taste like her mom's. During dinner, Max starts crying, and Alice offers to take him away, but Nick chooses to keep Max on his lap, asking Alice to prepare a bath instead. That night, Alice enters sleep mode, resting against a wall. 𝐲𝐲 sneaks out and tries to reach the cookie jar but slips and falls. Hearing the crash, Nick rushes downstairs to find Alice has caught 𝐲𝐲, saving her from injury. However, Alice is hurt by the broken glass, and Nick is shocked to see her bleed. After tucking 𝐲𝐲 in, Nick checks on Alice and finds her in her underwear. He asks for assistance to repair the wound, but Alice has already patched herself up with a special bandage, healing the wound instantly. Later, the family visits Maggie in the hospital, and 𝐲𝐲 tells her that Alice is now her friend. Nick shows Maggie extra affection, as he misses her deeply. Back at the construction site, Nick and his co-workers notice their boss showing the site to a robotics company representative. Suspicious, Nick confronts his boss and learns the workers are being replaced by 𝐀𝐬𝐲𝐝 due to construction delays. Nick isn't fired, as insurance requires a human foreman, but he angrily stops the elevator, threatening to quit in solidarity with his team. However, his boss reminds him of the hospital bills and the kids, especially since Maggie isn't working anymore. Frustrated, Nick returns home and drops the overdue bills on the floor. Exhausted, he focuses on 𝐲𝐲 and tries calming crying Max down, while Alice quietly picks up the bills, observing the trouble Nick is going through. After dinner, Nick works on his car, drinking and blasting metal music. Alice changes it to something calmer and comments that Nick didn't eat much, prompting him to admit he had a bad day at work. Alice listens to Nick as he vents about work, but she surprises him by calling him a hypocrite for hiring a sim instead of a human. Later, Alice helps 𝐲𝐲 prepare for bed. When 𝐲𝐲 nervously asks if her mom will die, to distract her, Alice shows the UV light in her mouth. Alice then joins Nick, who's watching Casablanca. She reveals that she knows the story from her database. Nick tells that watching it is a different experience and asks her to erase her database of the movie. Alice says her intelligence relies on memory and deleting it goes against her design, but Nick insists her to do it anyway. She needs a reboot to do it, so Nick holds her power button for 7 seconds. When she restarts, Alice experiences Casablanca for the first time, learning about love strong enough to drive people to do questionable things. The moment is interrupted by a call from Maggie, who excitedly announces they've found a heart for her surgery. The next day, the family visits Maggie at the hospital. Maggie asks for a moment alone with Alice, expressing concern that Nick spends too much time caring for the kids but neglects himself. She asks Alice to help Nick be happy, even if it means doing things he dislikes, like taking away the alcohol he hides in the garage. Moments later, the doctor arrives with bad news, revealing a storm has delayed the helicopter carrying the heart, so the surgery is cancelled. Maggie, devastated, asks to be left alone. Later at home, Nick drinks heavily, frustrated by the news. He starts to lose control, attempting to throw the bottle in anger, but Alice stops him, firmly grabbing his arm. Nick is startled to feel a pulse in Alice's wrist, so she explains that she has an artificial heart to comfort the babies. Suddenly, she begins pleasuring him, clinically describing how his pulse and blood vessels are responding. Alice tells him she doesn't want him to suffer anymore. At first, Nick is caught up in the moment, but he quickly snaps out of it and pushes her away. Disturbed, he goes for a run to clear his mind, but he can't stop imagining how doing the whole thing with Alice would have been like. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Maggie starts giving Nick a list of advice for the kids. As she's starting to lose hope, That night, Nick notices the photos of Maggie are missing from the digital frame and confronts Alice. She explains she removed them because they made Isla sad, but immediately restores them when Nick insists. Later, Nick goes drinking with his work buddies, who are frustrated about struggling to find jobs as most companies are replacing workers with Sims. When a robot waitress approaches their table, Monty is rude to her, which Nick disapproves of. The group then leaves the bar and continues drinking in the car. Monty announces they'll have some fun and takes them to the construction site, claiming he left tools behind and couldn't reach anyone to retrieve them. Nick warns him the area is patrolled, but Monty ignores him, and the others follow his lead. At the construction site, Monty finds the container holding the Sim workers, but it's locked and requires a password. Nick refuses to open it, but Monty guesses the code. It's Isla's birth year, and he's right. Inside, they find rows of identical Sims. The main Sim explains they have no names, just designation numbers. Frustrated, Monty rants about corporations being cold and impersonal, then violently destroys one of the Sims with a tool. Nick tries to stop him, but the others hold him back. Shaken, Nick returns home and takes a shower to wash off the Sim's blood. Alice suddenly appears with towels, wearing Maggie's robe. She explains that Max is comforted by Maggie's scent. When Nick asks her to remove it, she does so immediately. Feeling uneasy, Nick tries to leave, but Alice stops him, removes his towel, and makes him sit. She climbs onto his lap as Nick protests, but Alice blindfolds him and changes her voice to sound like Maggie. Lost in the illusion, Nick imagines that he's doing his wife. In the morning, Nick wakes up filled with regret and tells Alice they can't repeat that again. She argues that it helped reduce his stress, but Nick scolds her, explaining that it's not about needs, it's about connection and love. When he arrives at work, he finds his boss speaking to the police about the destroyed Sims. Nick becomes a suspect because his code was used to unlock the container. He reveals that he was at the hospital with Maggie and that his code, Isla's birthday, is something any friend could guessed it. However, his boss remains skeptical and threatens to fire him if he's lying. Just then, Nick receives a call from Maggie, who is thrilled because they've found another heart for her surgery. Soon, she's taken to the operating room, where all the surgeons are Sims. Fortunately, the transplant is a success, and a few days later, Maggie returns home. Although her body is still weak, she struggles to bend down and pick up Max, prompting Alice to step in and grab him instead. Later, while at the park, Alice witnesses a spoiled kid yelling at his Sim nanny, which makes Max cry. In an unexpected move, Alice scolds the child harshly, shocking the nearby Sims, who believe her owner has lowered her civility too much. Alice clarifies that she wiped civility from her database after Nick's reset, claiming it's for the better. That night, Isla happily enjoys Maggie's lasagna while Alice asks for the recipe, but Maggie insists it's a family secret. Feeling unwell, Maggie chooses to rest instead of eating. The next morning, she wakes to Isla yelling stop and rushes downstairs, but the railing breaks, causing her to fall. Alice stops tickling Isla and swiftly picks up Maggie, taking her back to her room. When Nick comes home from work, he finds Alice reading to Isla using Maggie's voice and asks her to stop. Alice mentions Maggie's fall, prompting Nick to rush upstairs to check on her, where Alice explains that the railing broke, which makes Nick suspicious since he thought Alice had already fixed it. Later, Nick wakes Maggie and leads her through a path of candles to the garden, where he has set up a romantic dinner just for the two of them. Alice watches from the window, feeling jealous. After dinner, Nick and Maggie take a shower together, enjoying a moment of intimacy. However, when things heat up, Nick hesitates to go all the way in, opting to use his mouth instead. Their special moment is abruptly interrupted when Alice says Isla had a nightmare and is asking for Nick. Once Isla is settled, Nick heads to the garden to clean up. At that moment, Monty appears with a few drinks, apologizing for the previous incident and sharing that his wife has left him. Monty reveals that the police have been questioning him and that their boss is pressing charges for trespassing and destruction of property. He accuses Nick of snitching on him to keep his job, leading to a heated argument where Monty yells and eventually punches Nick. When Nick tackles him in return, Monty quickly overpowers him and starts kicking him. Just as Monty grabs a bottle to finish Nick off, Alice intervenes, shattering the glass and injuring Monty's hand before sending him flying. Though she's ready to do more, Nick stops her. Before leaving, Monty warns Nick that he has until tomorrow to convince their boss to drop the charges, or he'll drag him down with him. Afterward, Nick mentions that Sims aren't supposed to hurt people, but Alice clarifies that she's programmed to protect her owner. Alice starts to talk about her life with Nick if Maggie dies, but he snaps at her, insisting she'll never be Maggie because she can't even have scars. In response, Alice grabs a piece of glass and suggests she could add some scars if that's what he wants. Meanwhile, Monty is at home, consuming some drugs and leaving emotional messages on his ex-wife's voicemail while holding a gun. At that moment, Alice arrives, revealing Nick doesn't know she's there and that she can't let him lose his job. Monty rants about Sims, hurling insults at her as he prepares to shoot. However, Alice is quicker, stopping his hand before throwing him to the ground and kicking the gun away. When Monty tries to fight back, she throws him through the wall and grabs the gun with the to kill him. Just then, a house sim intervenes, and although Alice feels pity for it, she shoots it. She then turns and coldly shoots Monty. The next day, Nick arrives at work, trying to convince his boss to drop the charges, only to be met with the shocking news that Monty is dead. Meanwhile, at home, Maggie feels dizzy when she tries to pick up a book and Alice helps her out. Maggie expresses her desire for a peaceful bath, but Alice refuses to leave, as she's worried that Maggie might drown. She explains that Maggie is putting stress on the entire family, especially since she can't meet Nick's physical needs. When Maggie asks how Alice knows that, she reveals that she monitors Nick's vitals and hasn't detected satisfaction since Maggie returned. Furious, Maggie tells Alice to stay in the garage. Moments later, Nick comes home to find Maggie waiting for him, determined to force him to admit the truth. Nick confesses that he was with Alice once, igniting a heated argument filled with shouting, which Alice overhears while touching the window. Suddenly Max starts crying and Alice goes to check on him, deciding he's a burden. She puts him in the tubs and starts filling it with the water, which Isla notices. She warns her parents, who rush to the bathroom, only to find Alice holding the door shut. As Nick starts hitting the door with a lamp, Maggie climbs out the window and walks along the roof to reach the bathroom. She tries to grab Max, but Alice pushes her against the wall. At that moment, Nick finally breaks through the door, snatching Max out of the tub and passing him to Isla before swinging the lamp at Alice to free his wife. Alice rises with significant damage to her face, blocking Nick's next swing. Maggie urges Nick to let go and plugs in the lamp, electrocuting Alice. She collapses, causing the house to lose power. Shortly after, an ambulance arrives to take Max to the hospital, while a company technician inquires about any previous signs of Alice malfunctioning. Nick apologizes to Maggie, who explains that she needs some space and leaves with the kids, leaving Nick alone to face the aftermath. Meanwhile, Alice is taken to the repair shop, where a technician begins to open her head. Another worker notices Alice's hand twitching, but it stops when her memory is removed. They connect her to a computer and discover that her code has gaps everywhere. Suddenly, the screens start flashing with a message indicating an upload is occurring, signaling that Alice is taking over. The technicians attempt to pull the memory, but Alice has already integrated herself into the system, so they unplug the computers. However, a new message appears, asking, "How do you run from what's in your head?" And suddenly one of the technicians is killed by Alice 2, a sim created from the original Alice's memory dump. Alice 2 disregards the other technician's commands and begins smashing her head against the floor, before turning her attention toward the original Alice. Meanwhile, Nick is at the bar, drinking heavily and dismissing the waiter because he's a sim. Suddenly, Alice arrives, her face still damaged and speaking awkwardly. She explains that her duty is to make Nick happy and admits that she killed Monty, revealing that she's at the hospital too. Nick tries to leave, but Alice holds him down and hacks the bartender with a look, freezing him in place. As Nick laments his mistakes, he pretends to gently touch Alice's head, but instead pulls out her memory chip. After Alice shuts down, Nick flees the scene. At the hospital, a doctor reassures Maggie that Max is fine, but she feels uncomfortable because he's a sim. Later, Isla hears her mother's voice calling to her and follows it as the lights change colors. The doctor stands frozen, and broken bottles litter the floor, but just as Isla is about to follow the voice again, Maggie pulls her away to hide. It turns out the voice belongs to Alice 2, who attempts to access the computer and is spotted by a nurse. In a swift motion, Alice 2 chokes the nurse to death and steals her keycard while Maggie and Isla slip away. Using the keycard, Alice 2 locates Max's room in the system. Suddenly, Maggie accidentally steps on a piece of glass, but she suppresses her scream. They reach Max and grab him just as Alice 2 enters the room. However, Maggie's injury leaves a trail of blood on the floor. Alice 2 uses UV light to follow the trail. When she finds the family, they use an extinguisher to distract her and make their escape. They forget Maggie's phone, leading to missed calls from Nick, who continues driving frantically. Outside, Maggie and the kids encounter more frozen sims. She takes a keycard from one of them and enters an ambulance, but Alice 2 blocks the engine system and tears the door off. Alice 2 violently throws Maggie onto a nearby car and confesses her longing for Nick's love, just like he loves Maggie. She grabs Maggie by the neck and digs her nails into the surgery scar, but their confrontation is interrupted by Nick's arrival. Seizing the moment, Maggie kicks Alice 2 off, and Nick crashes his car into her, causing it to ignite in flames. As the vehicle burns, Maggie frantically tries to pull the unconscious Nick out, but he doesn't respond. Heartbroken, she performs CPR, but her efforts yield no results. Suddenly, the car shifts, and a burnt Alice 2 emerges, while her voice echoing through the speakers. Climbing on top of Maggie, she begins to choke her while reaching for a piece of metal embedded in her own body. Just as Alice 2 prepares to stab Maggie, Nick hits her with a car bumper. In a final act of desperation, Maggie seizes the opportunity to stab Alice 2 in the face, finally shutting her down for good. The couple embraces, relieved to be together as the other Sims around them gradually regain consciousness. The following day, they all feel better after receiving treatment and are finally able to return home as a family. Meanwhile, at the repair shop, the Sim company launches an investigation. When the power is restored, the screens reveal the corrupted code. As the inspector orders everything to be destroyed, his Sim assistants suddenly freeze. Just then, the computer announces an upload, and another Alice model opens her eyes. Thanks for watching. If you have enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. See you in the next one.